Hey, what's up? It's Jared with State of Tech, and today I wanted to talk about kind of a weird comparison between the iPhone XS Max and the Canon 80D. So I've got a Canon 80D here that I've had for a number of years. This camera is coming up on 3 years old, and Canon hasn't updated it yet. It came out in February, almost 3 years ago. And then I've got my iPhone XS Max. And the iPhone XS Max is fantastic. It has the same exact camera as the XS, so I'm not going to be saying Max the whole time. It's just too many words. But on the iPhone XS, we have a 12 megapixel camera. We actually have two 12 megapixel cameras. One is a wide angle, one is more of a telephoto, and they both have an f1.8 aperture lens on them. Now what that means is that it's a super wide aperture, which helps with that shallow depth of field. It helps with that portrait mode, and then it also lets a lot of light in, so it makes it better in low light situations. On the Canon 80D here, we have a 24 megapixel, which means a lot more pixels there as far as the size of the image that this is going to output. It's double the size. And then on this lens is actually an 18 to 135 millimeter, so a huge range of zoom, and everywhere in between too, not just one or the other. And then it's an f3.5 to f5.6, which means when you're at 18 millimeters, you're getting that 3.5, and when you zoom all the way in, you're getting that 5.6. So it actually does close down a little bit on you as you zoom in. So I don't want to talk too much about it because I've covered this type of stuff at length over on Ditch Auto, which is another YouTube channel that I have. And then I also have a free photography course that teaches you how to get out of automatic mode and start using manual mode on your DSLR camera. It's a free course, so I highly recommend that you check it out. So these cameras, I mean, camera and phone really are about the same price. This camera right here with this kit lens, if you bought it brand new, is going to be about $1,300. And yes, this camera is getting a little old, but I just got done putting a video together talking about how this camera has held up over the last 3 years over at Ditch Auto. So make sure to check that out if you're interested in a DSLR camera like this. But this camera is about $1,300 and this camera is about $1,300. So really, what's the difference these days between a DSLR camera, which is obviously quite large, and an iPhone, which is very small and pocketable and something that you're probably going to own anyways? So of course I'm talking about the iPhone in this video, but we could easily be talking about most of the new Android phones that have came out. So we're going to talk about just overall image quality and features and what really is the best option for you. So we're not going to really talk too much about size because it's obvious that this camera is significantly larger than this one, and this is going to require thinking about it. I mean, you're going to have to carry this in a bag of some sort. You'll need maybe a shoulder strap or something just to, you can't put this in your pocket. It's just too big. And you can't just leave it sitting on the table because it's too big. I mean, everything about this camera is just too big. So you really have to take that into consideration depending on what you're going to be doing. If it's just a trip to the park with the kids, or maybe it's a backpacking vacation and you already have a lot of gear. I mean, there's a lot of things to take into consideration when it comes to the size of the equipment that you're taking with you. But we're not going to waste too much time on that because what it really comes down to is what produces the best image. So like I said, this is a 12 megapixel, this is a 24. They obviously have different ways of using lenses and sensors to capture photos. This one has two lenses to capture either a wide angle or a more telephoto. And then this camera gives you options such as zoom lenses. And there's lots of different lenses that you can get because you can actually remove this lens from the camera and attach other lenses to it to get different focal lengths, to get lenses that perform differently. This is a kit lens, which means it comes with the camera. It's not a super high-end lens, but it does do actually a really good job. And so I'll be showing you photo examples between the two different cameras. And then I'm not really going to show you too much as far as video goes because this camera only shoots 1080p. It doesn't shoot 4K like the iPhone does. The The iPhone will shoot 4K at 30p or 60p, and these days everything that I'm shooting is 4K. I'm not shooting anything down in 1080p anymore because most people have some sort of a device that's over 1080p, and I want my content to be super sharp, and I want it to be future-proof as well. Because cameras like this, people are going to be using the 80D for another 4 or 5 years easily. And in 4 or 5 years, everything is going to be 4K at least, or maybe even 5 or 6K. So I want to make sure that my content is future-proof. So when it comes to taking photos, the iPhone obviously has portrait mode, and Apple has really touted just how good portrait mode is. And all what portrait mode is doing is it's using both of the cameras on the phone to take a few different pictures and then use calculations to separate your subject from the background. Now, I like to use portrait mode on a variety of things, not just people, but also flowers or objects that I want to separate from the background. And I'll use my phone because I don't want to carry around a big camera with me. Like the camera that I'm shooting this video on right now is the Sony a7 III and the new 24mm 1.4f GM lens. And the reason that this video looks so good with the background being like super out of focus is because I'm shooting this wide open at f1.4. That's even wider of an aperture than the iPhone, and you have to spend quite a bit of money to get a lens for this camera that has as wide of an aperture as an f1.4. So with that said, there are things that you can do to get that better portrait look out of a camera like this. Because one of the things that happens when you're shooting portrait mode with a phone is that sometimes it doesn't do a good job of detecting the edges. If you've ever used portrait mode and the ear has been blurry but the face right next to it is sharp, it's because the software of the camera of the phone does not really know what's foreground and what's background, and so it's guessing, and maybe the ear or maybe some little artifact or whatever is out of focus or in focus, and it just makes the image look fake. Now, in perfect situation, with a minimal background, that portrait mode's gonna look great. And there's some other modes that really are kind of interesting in the iPhone camera. And of course, some of the other cameras like the Pixel camera and the Samsung Galaxy cameras are doing different things to differentiate themselves. But really, when it comes to shooting an image that has a very shallow depth of field, which means the depth of field that's in focus is very shallow, the subject is in focus, but the background falls off into blurry really quick, they're having to fake it to make it, essentially, because even though there are two lenses on this camera and one can shoot a wide and one can shoot a telephoto, it's still requiring a lot of math. And even if you put it into that telephoto and try to take a portrait mode photo, the background still doesn't fall off really that well unless you use the actual portrait mode and let the camera do a little bit of its own math and computing in order to make that photo happen. Of course, it does a great job considering these phones are so tiny and everything about them is so small. Keep in mind the size differences between these cameras. But when it comes to wanting photos that are really good, that are sharp edge to edge, even though the blurriness of the background, there's still a sharpness in that. Even though the fall off in an image like what you're looking at now, or some of the images that I've shown you on screen, the fall off it goes from sharp to blurry. The edges of the image are still nice and clear, and nothing looks really funky with the edges of those images. Whereas with the iPhone or some of the other phones, it's a bunch of math happening, and it's just not a good looking image as you look outward towards the edges of the image. So you're gonna get a better overall image with a camera like this, because a camera like this actually is doing it all in the camera with the technology here. It's not using software to figure it out. It's not using guesswork, essentially. Of course, if you're shooting in automatic mode, there are some settings that it's guessing on. But if you've taken my Ditch Auto course and you're shooting in manual mode, you're gonna get very consistent images all the time, images that you can take very quickly, whereas with the iPhone, if you put it in portrait mode, you have to get it all lined up, you have to tap, you have to take the photo, it takes longer to capture it. There's a lot of things that are happening that take more time, whereas with a camera like this, you could have taken 10 to 20 images already by the time the iPhone was ready to take a second one. So keep in mind those those attempts, you take a photo and somebody blinks or you miss the action of whatever's happening, that's more likely to happen on something like a phone, especially in some of those portrait modes or those assisted modes. Of course, the iPhone can take like unlimited burst images, but one of the things that the iPhone does, unless you use a manual camera app that allows you to set your settings manually, is it's every time it takes a photo, it's optimizing the settings. The same thing as if you put this camera in automatic mode. It's optimizing the settings of the camera to try and get the best image that it thinks it can get. But what's happening there is that your images are not consistent anymore, because in one image you may have been closer to the sun, so it's changing the white balance, it's changing the shutter speed, and then as you move away, it may be a little bit shadier, not that big of a difference, but it changes the color of that image, and it also changes the shutter speed, and then you get a little bit of blurriness to your image because maybe the shutter speed now is too slow and it's allowing for too much to happen while the shutter is opened, and so you get that blurriness. That also happens in lower light situations. The iPhone has gotten really good at low light situations, but you have to hold that phone still. There's no shaking the phone at all or doing that and walking. You're gonna get a horribly blurry image. And if you turn the flash on, the image is just gonna look bad altogether. Whereas with a camera like this, you can increase the ISO a little bit. The lens obviously is huge, so there's a lot more light coming in and hitting the sensor, so it's going to perform better in low light situations, and the camera is designed to handle all of that. With the iPhone, there's only so much that it can do. Now, the iPhone does take fantastic images, and most of the time for just occasional photos, the iPhone's gonna take a perfectly good image. But if you need to be able to zoom in and capture something that's happening, and you do that on an iPhone, you're gonna be getting past that 2x zoom, and it's gonna go into digital zoom, and that image is gonna degrade quickly, and you're gonna lose quality. Whereas with a zoom lens like this, you can zoom all the way to the end and you're not going to lose any clarity in your image. Your image is going to be just as sharp and good as it was at 18 millimeters as it is at 135 millimeters. Now, both the iPhone and a camera like this shoot in JPEG and RAW, so you can get those RAW images, which give you much more information for editing. There's a lot more flexibility in a RAW image, and I'm glad that you can get those out of the iPhone now. So it really comes down to the situation and the personal preference. Do you want to carry around a camera like this so that you can get better images? Of course, it's a big camera, it's heavy, you're going to need to think about all of that, and maybe even have a couple of different lenses based on what scenario. It's another thing to worry about charging. It's another memory card that you have to think about and stuff like that. Whereas the iPhone is just ready to go all the time, and it does a good job at what it does, albeit rather limited in comparison to a camera like this. So I want to hand it over to you guys. I showed you some comparison images. I talked about the differences between them. Really, it's up to you. It's a personal preference on whether or not you want to carry both or just rely on the phone. I don't think that you're not going to have a phone and just have a camera, because we all need our phones. And it's very easy actually to connect this camera to your phone to transfer images. So that's not even a real argument these days, is that it's much easier to share images from an iPhone than it is from a camera like this. It's essentially just one step, because this camera has Wi-Fi, it quickly connects to your phone, and then of course you can share that image across social media, edit it in any of your favorite apps. It's all pretty quick and simple to do. So I'm going to hand it off to you guys. Let's talk about this down in the comment section below. Like I said before, I've got the links in the description to the camera and the accessories in case you're interested. So I just want to hear your opinion. I want to see what you guys think. To those of you that have both maybe a phone and a DSLR, or maybe some of you who are just straight up phone only and you don't want to move over into the DSLR world, let's talk about that. I want to hear your pros and cons and see if they match up with mine. So I'll be hanging out down in the comment section, and I look forward to chatting with you all there. Until next time, my name's Jared with State of Tech. I hope you head over to my other channel, Ditch Auto, so you can check out some of my photography related content. I'd love to see you over there. But until then, hope to see you back here soon on State of Tech. Take care.